Anyway, we're happy to be back. These are monthly events that I know many of you know about. I want to, as I always do, thank the three organizations that make these evenings possible. First one is the Judson Memorial Church, in which you are now sitting. It's been here a very, very long time. Very old church here in New York City, one of the oldest. And the minister here who invited us to come and do this every month is an enthusiastic supporter of what we do here and of this event, and has therefore made this space available, and we are very grateful for her doing that. Number two is the Left Forum, an organization I think some of you know that has a huge conference once a year, usually in the spring, here in New York City, and has been doing that for about 30 years. Usually brings between 3,500 and 5,000 people, academics and activists. The last few years, it's been at the John Jay College of the City University of New York. And I'm pleased to say that we are in the process of organizing the 2018 Left Forum. But for the first time, there will also be a Left Forum on the West Coast, which we have helped organize. And the first of those will be on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November in Los Angeles. It will probably be alternating each year between Los Angeles and this Bay Area in San Francisco. But the first of these is now being organized, and if you have any questions, go to the website of the Left Forum and you will find information there about it. And third and finally, it's Democracy at Work. That's the organization that literally presents and organizes these evenings and takes care of the video and so forth. And you can find out more about it by talking to any of the folks that are outside at the table that you passed on your way in. Okay, and then jumping into the particular announcements for today. As you know, at least those of you who've come before, it is possible to sponsor these evenings. It's a way for us to raise money to pay the costs of doing all of this. And so we have invited now for about a year people who are willing to sponsor an evening to come forward and doing it. And they've been doing it to our immense gratification and surprise, and good for our treasury too. And so I want to thank the sponsor of tonight's program. A little bit different from the sponsors we've had before, who have mostly been individuals or small groups. This is a wonderful group of people whose name is, I didn't make this up, Snuggly Wuggly Socialists. It is a Facebook group. They are over now 13,000 socialists on this Facebook group. They're fans of this program that we do here, and they have collectively organized to help sponsor the cost of an episode of these lectures. And they've also inspired us to live stream this event on Facebook, which is what we are doing this evening. So I want to wave hello to our Snuggly Wuggly Socialists and hope that all of you are inspired by the very existence and the obviously very creative name that they have come up with for what they do. It's also a good time for me to remind any of you that might be so disposed. We would be very happy to have you sponsor one of these events, whether or not you can do that. By the way, you can find out all about it. Go to our website, democracyatwork.info/sponsor, and all the details of how to do that are available to you there. But whether or not you want to sponsor, if you are interested in helping us and working with us, we are always looking for partners. And by partners, I mean people who can use what we do, the radio show, the television show that we produce. That's a weekly hour-long show that I think many of you know about. We now produce clips of portions of those shows that we make available through the social media that we operate, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and so on. Please use those things. It's why we produce them, share them, let other people know about them. And in particular, if you're interested in supporting us, even with as little as $3 a month, There is a website I want to direct you to called patreon.com. Some of you may know about it. Patreon. And if you go to patreon.com, you can see the television version of the weekly program, Economic Update, that we produce, but you can also be financially supportive to any amount that you may be so inclined to do. You might be particularly interested in what's about to come on there. The last program that we produced is an interview of me with Chris Hedges, who came on the program, and I think you would find it very interesting to see what Chris had to say in response to the questions we did. Finally, I'm sorry there's so much about the money, but from time to time we have to do it. We do occasionally rely not only on our own supporters, which is our basic source of income, but we do occasionally appeal to foundations when we think there's a particular thing we're doing that they might be interested in. And one of the foundations that has been very supportive of us is called the Lenin Foundation. Some of you may know the name of that. It's located in Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's an active foundation. And they gave us a couple of weeks ago a $30,000 matching grant. For every dollar we now get between now and the end of the year, or at least the end of the month, for every dollar we get, they will match it, dollar for dollar, up to $30,000. So, if any of you were thinking of helping us out but weren't sure when to do it, if you do it now, it will be double to us. It'll be double the value of whatever it is you provide. You just, again, you go to our website and it'll explain to you how to donate, and that will then be counted by Lenin for the matching amount of money. Okay. Let's turn then to both the topics we have on the agenda for tonight and a few shorter opening items. I want to start with a story about what happened yesterday and the day before in two countries that have more than a passing similarity with the United States, economically speaking. Great Britain and France. So let's start with France. Yesterday, the 12th of September, there were demonstrations in every, let me underscore this, in every city of France, there were demonstrations. According to the organizer of the demonstration, which was the CGT, which means in French, the General Confederation of Workers, according to them, 225,000 people demonstrated in the streets of France, the biggest in Paris, but everywhere. Their estimate was $400,000. The Interior Ministry of France estimated 223. For those of you that are veterans of these kinds of actions, it's normal. The government tries to lowball the estimates, and you have to try to offset that. What were they demonstrating about? They were demonstrating against a new president, just elected a few months ago, Mr. Macron. Some of you may have followed his career. He's achieving a stunning result. He has lost half of his popularity in the first 3 months of office, during which he didn't do anything. One exception. He made an effort, and you cannot make this up, to have his wife designated the official First Lady of France. This seemed to have been important to him, cost him half his support. You know, some people don't learn. Mr. Macron is now trying to recoup himself, at least with part of France, by engaging in a project of labor reform. For those of you that are working people, when you hear the phrase labor reform, grab your wallet because someone is reaching into it and using the phrase labor reform. Labor reform has nothing to do with reform. It is snatching away from labor something it already has, but calling it, instead of we're taking it away from you, a reform, which sounds better. You know, it's like the bus driver who changes his title and becomes a transportation engineer, right? Okay, feels better. Feels better to the likes of Macron to do that. What does the labor reform involve? Number one, under French law, many of you I assume don't know this, you cannot fire a worker in France because you don't like him or her, you don't agree with how they work. You can't do that. You have to go through an elaborate procedure, and a worker has the right to say, I don't agree with this, And then there are courts and procedures in which the two sides have to present, and a neutral party adjudicates whether or not you were fired for just cause. And it's not easy to do. And if it turns out you were fired for not just cause, you get a lot of money, and they are penalized for having put you through this procedure. It's not just that you get the wages you didn't get, but you get a hefty penalty that you get the money to. The employer class in France, this will come as a shock, doesn't like this. They've against it, and they've tried over the years to get rid of this. Mr. Macron, a former Socialist Party official in France, has proposed getting rid of this in the following form. He wants to put a cap on how much money can be awarded. That no matter how grievous the firing of a worker proves to be, you can't get more than a much lower amount than used to be the norm. So this is a way of helping the employer class. Number two, he wanted to be able to continue a cap on public employee salaries. This was wildly opposed by all the public employees in France. Public sector in France is very large. And he made noises, although he didn't do it, of challenging the length of the working week in France, which is 35 hours. Not 40, 35, which is a lower number than 40. You are all governed by a 40-hour-a-week rule, and then you have to get paid time and a half over 40. They have to get paid time and a half over 35. Figure it out. It's a better deal. He didn't attack that, because then they wouldn't have had 250,000 of people in the streets. Then he would have had, his car would have been set on fire, possibly with him in it. So there were demonstrations, because the trade unions in France don't like any of this. They understand what labor reform is. The reason I'm telling you the story is the bill was proposed a few weeks ago. Even though he has a majority in the French Parliament, he was so afraid of what the public debate over this would be that he didn't do it by a parliamentary vote. He did it by decree, which weakens, of course, it looks like what it is. And so the CGT, the second biggest union in France, went into the streets to demonstrate and promised more demonstrations. The biggest union didn't participate. Otherwise, this would have been twice as large. Those are fights among the unions that have always, of course, weakened the labor movement as a whole. But I want to stress to you, the French people, when they don't like something the government does, do something about it. That doesn't mean they don't grouse over dinner. It doesn't mean they don't throw things at the TV. It doesn't mean that they don't get angry. It means that in addition to all of that, they go into the streets and make life impossible. The CGT represents the transportation workers, the energy workers. It has organized every nuclear energy plant in France, which is how France gets most of its energy. There's a very powerful union, and they are serving notice on the government that there's going to be trouble. Across the English Channel in England, much the same. You may be surprised to know that the British Conservative government has wanted to put all kinds of restrictions on public employees, went to town to do it recently by putting a cap on public sector jobs, not allowing the wages of public employees to go up at all, which has hurt public employees, obviously. They were particularly hostile to people who work in the NHS, that's the National Health Service, the public health program for all British people. That's a way of killing the public health service. It drives away doctors, it drives away nurses. You can't live on the kind of income. It's a long-standing campaign, and the unions have been against it. The Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, who's kind of the British Bernie Sanders. You probably wouldn't like me saying that, but just to help in an American audience, he's sort of the Bernie Sanders over there. He announced that this was no good, and he urged the labor movement to do something. So, leaders of the 3 major trade unions in England have raised the threat of an illegal strike action if the government does not withdraw all of these proposals. In British, under British rules, you have to get a vote of 50% or more from your union membership to call a strike. We don't have that here, they have that there. But of course, if you don't want to abide by that, then you have an illegal strike. And then the government says you can't do that. And then the union starts laughing. You can say what you want. Nothing's going to move in this country unless you come to terms with us. Interesting. It's a different way of thinking about what you're doing and how you do it. So something is going on both in the labor movements of France and the labor movements of England that I thought you might be interested in, if only as a way of coming to terms with the labor movement here and what it does or doesn't do. All right, next item. A study was released this last week by the Census Department and by other agencies of the United States government, but the final report is from the Census Bureau. It's called Income and Poverty in the United States, 2016. It's a long document, but I wanted to pick out a few statistics. I'm sorry to throw these all at you, but they will give you a snapshot of the United States economy now that is in some ways more concisely clear than what I could explain if I took a lot of time. Okay, so here's some of the interesting highlights, maybe to whet your appetite. In 2016, that's the last year for which we have data, median annual earnings for men working full-time, $51,600. Median means 50% of American men working full-time make more than that, and 50% make less than that. So it's 51,000 is the median annual income of males working full-time. Women, $41,500, $10,000 less. Okay, think about that. Let's continue. We're now going to look at households. Households, which usually mean more than one adult, although it don't have to, but you lump all households together, and you get an interesting set of numbers. Median household income in the United States, $59,000, 2016. $59,000. That includes everybody, all ages. The census broke out non-elderly. So remove the elderly, I assume that's people over 65 or something like that. Non-elderly, the median income is $66,000. Half of American households earn less than that, and half of American households earn more. Over the period 2000 to 2016, that's the 16 years of this century, median households for everybody fell by 2.3%. For people who are not elderly, it fell by 5%. Let me do that again. Over the last 16 years, the median household income in the United States for everybody fell by 2.3%, and for non-elderly, 5%. You want to understand, for example, why men and women are having some difficulties, and the disparity in how they're paid, and the disparity in what has happened to them, or households are upset, heaven forbid, about what's going on in the economy. You don't really have to look all that much further. But here are some more. Median household income for white, non-Hispanic households in 2016. White, non-Hispanic households, $65,000 a year, median. Median household for African American households, 2016. 50% make more, 50% less. The white one was $65,000. The blacks, $39,400. I could play the national anthem, but I won't. Median household income for Hispanic households, same time, 2016, $47,000, more than African Americans, much less than for whites. Over the 16 years since the year 2000, median white household income fell 1%. African Americans over the same period, their median household income fell 7.5%. Poverty rate. Just so you know, the poverty rate, there's a number that the government calculates, which is if you're below that, you're poverty stricken, and if you're above it, you're not. It's kind of arbitrary, but it's what the government uses, and it gives you a rough idea. Poverty rate, white, non-Hispanic Americans as a whole, 8.8%. 8.8%, 1 out of 12 Americans who are white and non-Hispanic are in poverty. African Americans, same year, 2016, what percentage are in poverty? The whites, as I said, 8.8%. African Americans, 22%. Hispanics, 19.4%. For those of you who don't understand the racial problem of the United States, it isn't a racial problem as much as it is something else. These are folks that are systematically underpaid, plunged into poverty, kept in that condition year in and year out. Wealth. Wealth is different from income. Income is the amount of money you bring in, each year of your life. Wealth is the amount of stuff you own that you have accumulated over your lifetime, or you've inherited from somebody, or you found it in the woods. However, you have stuff, you have stuff. So that we keep a record, and the government doesn't do this so well, but there is a professor here at NYU who actually has the same last name as I do, spells it the same way, Wolff. But his name is Edward Wolff. We're not related in any way. But he is the authority, Edward Wolff at NYU, on measuring wealth in the United States. So I went to check on him, thought you might be interested in how the wealth numbers work out. And the way they calculate it is for a complicated reason, is they look at what is called wealth in non-durable goods. Non-durable means it's not a house or a car or a washing machine or durable goods, things that last for a while. That's all it means. Those are very hard to estimate and figure out what they're worth. Your 400-year-old stove that you're still using, what is that worth, etc. So they get rid of that. And they look at everything else. Savings accounts you have, pensions that you're entitled to, stocks and bonds if you're so lucky as to have them. So I thought you'd be interested. Median household wealth. That means, again, 50% have more and 50% have less. For white people in America, 2013. That's the latest numbers, because you're always a few years behind because it takes a long time to do the statistical work. So the latest year we have, 2013. Whites, $116,000. They have stored up, white people do, half of them, 116,000. I mean, half have less than that, half have more than that. Black Americans, African Americans, $1,700. Let me do that again. African Americans have on balance, median, $1,700 of liquid assets. The kind of thing which, if you have an emergency, you can go and get it and use it because you got sick or your car died or those kinds of things that happen to everybody. African Americans have $1,700. Latino Americans have $2,000. White people have $116,000. That's the median. Just think about it. There's really not much I can say. But if you wanted to have evidence of the divide in this country, and if I had more time, I'd show you that the divide is getting worse. That is, not only is the gap between rich and poor in America getting wider, but the gap between white and non-white also. And that's despite the fact that the decline in wages for white people has actually been worse than the wages for black and Latino. It's a very peculiar result these days, but that has happened. But it doesn't change the larger picture. Yes, sir.
Well, I can quickly. That's also talks about what can be handed down to the next generation.
Yes. And nothing. So that's why it continues forever. And one of the proposals I'm coming to in a minute, one of the proposals of Trump and the Republican Party is to do away with a little bit of estate tax that we still have in the United States. We used to have a pretty hefty estate tax, as it exists in many other countries, but it's been eroded over time, and Trump and the GOP want to get rid of it altogether. Even though at this point, the federal estate tax affects, the last time I looked, I believe 4,000 people. The exemptions are so enormous. You can leave your first, I think it's $11 million. For some of you can now relax. You can leave your first 11 million to your children, and the federal government will not bother you. So the estate tax that remains only hits the people who are going to be leaving more than that. Not too many of them are with us this evening. And after I finish what I'm doing now, even fewer will be in the room. Right? But they're going to get rid of it because the very wealthy people are the people who are behind Mr. Trump and the Republicans, and they don't want it for obvious reasons. However, Gary Cohn, I don't know how many of you caught this since our last meeting. Gary Cohn was in the newspapers. He made a mistake. He spoke to a reporter in a way he shouldn't have, and the reporter had a good time. Here's what he said. Anybody who pays the estate tax that's on the books now is a moron. That's a quote. Gary Cohn, who's likely going to be the next Federal Reserve chair, he announced that anybody so stupid as not to hire the lawyers that can get you out of the existing tax on inheritance, the one that the government is going to get rid of, so that the 11 morons who actually paid it won't have to anymore. And this is called kindness to morons proposal. We'll be able to get out of it. You can't make this stuff up. Fortunately, I don't need to. I just report to you, and you can enjoy it as if I was creative about this, but I'm not. You can't be funny or creative about this anywhere near as much. Okay, next item. It's all about taxes. And the reason I'm going to talk to you, bore you a little bit with taxes, is that you're going to be hearing about taxes a lot. It's a big agenda item. The Trump GOP is very nervous that they got shot down on getting rid of Obamacare. That made them look like they couldn't get things done. And they're going to change all that by getting a tax reform. Remember that word, reform? Hold on to your wallet. Tax reform is coming. And the GOP has an idea how to do this, and Mr. Trump is doing it. He tweeted, I believe today, that the Congress should get busy and reform the taxes. Go, Congress, go. He ended his tweet. It's high-level stuff here, you know. So my attention was caught by an article yesterday in Bloomberg News. That's the same Bloomberg as was such a wonderful adornment for this city for all those years. A short little person, if you ever saw him, who makes up for it by standing on large boxes. Anyway, Mr. Bloomberg is a billionaire many times over, for the reason most people are billionaires. He was at the right place at the right time, even if he didn't know what that place was or why he was there, but he was there. And the Bloomberg News is a very interesting source of information. I make a great deal of use of it, and I would urge you, if you're interested in learning about what's going on in the economy, it's a very useful source. Yesterday, 12th of September, There was a story by Ben Steverman, Steverman, if you're interested. It's all available on Google, no charge, etc., etc. And here's the title on Bloomberg: Why American Workers Pay Twice as Much in Taxes as Wealthy Investors Do. I could have written that title. I wished I had written that title. But Bloomberg News, which is a service for corporations basically and for business people, it's so gross, the American tax system, that even the other side who benefit from it are kind of embarrassed. As is Ben Steverman, whose editors at Bloomberg didn't mess with what he wrote. Or if they did, I would have liked to see what he wrote, if this is the watered down version. So first he does the following thing, which I thought was done only by people who studied with folks like me. He divides income into two kinds, which is a very rational thing to do. It's just we don't teach that in America. One way to earn income is by working. Many of you are familiar with that. You work and someone gives you money for doing it. If that's the only way you earn money, two things follow. One, I feel badly for you. And two, you are missing out. That's no way to get rich. There's a second way to earn money, which is to own property and to receive income because you own property, whether or not you do any work. Even though this is obvious and every one of you knows it, when I say it like that, your faces give it away, like I just said some off-color joke that is tasteless. So let me do it again. You can either earn money because you work and get paid, or you can own property. Let me give you an example. If you have land in our society, you own 20 acres. And let's suppose the community where you live is hungry, and they would like to use the land to grow potatoes so they won't be so hungry. In a world of private property, you have the following right. You say to them all, drop dead, die. You're not going to get my land. It's mine. You're like a toddler losing his or her truck in the sandbox. It's mine. Private property allows you to deny to other people the use of what you own. Now, most people won't do that, either because they have moral qualms about watching other people twitch to death from hunger, which isn't pleasant, or they would rather cut a deal. I'll let you use my piece of land to grow your potatoes. You can do whatever you want, but you got to give me money. You got to give me a rent. You got to pay. So I'm going to have income by letting you use the land. And of course that's reasonable, since you put the land there, didn't you? You created the land. You made the land. Of course they should pay you because you were in the right place at the right time. You didn't make anything. You didn't contribute anything. The landlord contributes. Some of you have had these feelings, haven't you? Nothing. He just takes your money. The landlord. Ownership of land. You get income. Here's another thing. You can have money. How do you have the money? This society doesn't care. You can have the money because you inherited it from your Uncle Harry. You can have the money because you snatched it out of the pocket of a person sitting next to you who had drunk too much the night before. But if you have the money, other people want it. And if it's yours, you can say, well, you might want it, but you can't have it, it's mine. But I'll let you use it for a while if you pay me. We don't call it a rent, we call it an interest payment. It's the same thing. You pay me, you get to use it for a while, and then you give it back, and you pay me an extra because I lent you the money. In our society, if you look at rich people, you very quickly discover something. The overwhelming majority of them are rich because they have a lot of that second kind of income. income from property, not income from labor. And the gentleman, Mr. Steverman in Bloomberg, he figured that out. So he decided to look at how taxes go by comparing the tax burden that the federal government puts on labor income compared to the tax burden it puts on property income. And remember, one of the beautiful things about property income is you don't have to do anything. I mean, if you own stocks and bonds, here's what you have to do to earn that money. Every few days, you walk to the mailbox and you get an envelope and you tear it open, you pull out the check, you're done. You can get this done between cups of coffee. You don't have to go anywhere, do anything, no muscle, no brain, nothing. Rich people are rich because they earn off of their property. Okay, let's do the numbers with him. He compared two people. They both earn $300,000 a year. One is a doctor and one is an investor. Investor is one of these wonderful words. An investor is a person who gets money from the property he makes temporarily available to other people. You use the word investor because it implies he's doing something. What do? I'm a carpenter. I'm a bricklayer. I'm a truck driver. I'm an investor. Huh? What? I invest. Oh, okay. It's a way to get a verb that implies I did something. You know, I spent the whole morning investing. Anyway, $300,000 wage earner, doctor, or anybody else. Tax rate, 34%. United States right now. $300,000 earned in dividends, interest. Tax rate, 14%. Let me do that again. You pay tax on your income from labor, 34%. You pay tax on your income from property, 14%. Now the numbers would be different if you had a higher or lower income because the tax rates are graded. But I wanted you to see, and he's done it in several ways. If you earn between $37,000 and $91,000, that takes in most Americans, per year. The tax on your labor, 25%. If you earn the same amount of money on your investment, tax on your income, 15%. You understand? You have a tax system that systematically favors income from investments, which is significant only for the tiny, wealthy part of the country. Meanwhile, all the rest of you who depend mostly on income from what you do, your labor, your brains, your muscles, you get to pay the high tax rates. You think the problem in America is that taxes are too high. But the truth is, they aren't too high. They're just too high on you because the taxes have been shifted off of other people onto you. So that the logical political reaction is, shift them back. What is this? Why did it develop? It's not written, as far as I know, in any holy book. I mean, you check the Bible, there are no tax tables. So this is a human construction. Human beings made these tax rates what they were. And how have they changed? Just in case you're wondering, could it ever change? Hasn't it always been this way? The answer is no. And Mr. Steverman does that for you too. It's all short articles. It's just wonderful what he did. The top rate of tax on individuals, the highest. In 1954, was 90%. I assume you've all known that because I've told you that story repeatedly, so you know. It's now 25%, the highest rate on income that way.
Isn't it 39?
It depends. If you add, you gotta be careful. If you add the taxes on top of it, like for Medicare and Affordable Care Act, it does go up above that. But he's talking about the basic rates that are compared. Last thing for you to think about. Top 1% of Americans save about 30% of their income. For every $10 they earn, they save 3. The top 0.1% of Americans save 50% of their income. The bottom 90% of Americans save 0.
They go to debt.
Well, basically, the debts of some offset the little bit that the savings of others. So if you take the 90% as a whole, their savings rate is 0. So who, of course, gets the money that will allow them to buy the land or the stocks or to make the loans to get income from property? It's the people who save. They're the ones who can do that. And who are the ones who save? The people who already have it. So if you don't already have it, oh boy, are you in trouble. Or as my mother used to say, the only way to get rich is to already be rich. And my father and she would have trouble about this. He knew it was true, he just didn't want to hear it. But then that characterized much of their relationship. Any case, let me turn now to another tax issue. It's going to be even more important for you in the weeks and months ahead that I want to prepare you for. Tax reform. Trump and the GOP, but I'm afraid also the Democrats. Since when it gets to this, it really doesn't matter all that much. Let's go through how it's done. To begin the story, it's a little complicated, but you'll be able to get it. To begin the story, keep 2 things in mind. Number 1, that the goal of Mr. Trump and the GOP is to cut taxes on corporations and the rich. And there's no mystery, and basically if you follow what they say and do, you can see it. It's not hidden in some way that you have to ferret it out. You have to pay a little attention, but this is not difficult to see. And the reason for it is not difficult to understand either. Those are the people who give money to political parties and to candidates. So if you want them to give you the money so you can have the TV ads showing you kissing babies and whatever else it is that motivates people to vote for you, you need the money to put that picture up there. So you need the rich people to give you the money, and the corporations and the rich are the ones who give away money. By comparison, let me be honest, you don't give very much. And the last time you gave $10,000 to a candidate, was in your dreams. But for other people, this is not an issue. And it's the same people again. So the Republicans have a long-standing game. They pander to the people who give them the money to then build the alliance that gets them into office. To do something for fundamentalist religious folks, to do something for social conservatives, to do something for whoever they need to bring into their tent to vote for them so that they can have the political power to cut the taxes of the rich who give them the money to maintain the alliance. That's the Republican, the conservative side of the party, of the politics of the country. So keep that in your mind. Second thing, you can't, of course, say what you're doing to the people because that looks ugly. You can't tell the people that we, the people, you can't do that. So you have to come up with another story. Part of the money that you get from rich donors, you use to pay creative people the money needed to concoct the story, to develop and embellish the story, to come up with genius ways of getting it out into the popular consciousness. So here's how the Republicans and the conservatives have done that. And you all know this because you live in it. The government is bad. The government, when it does anything, messes it up. So it's a silly waste of time and money to pay taxes to the government, because they just piss it all away in a flurry of inefficient waste. So be angry at them. Don't give them the money. Here we go, cut taxes as a kind of punishment for that stinking bad government that messes everything up. Embellish the story. We wouldn't have this bad government except in the past, bad politicians borrowed a lot of money to waste and to steal. And you all have to pay taxes to pay off the debt that the government accumulated. Because the government has to pay people back when it borrows, and it has to pay interest. And so your taxes, see, being wasted by these crooks who borrowed money and lined their pockets with it. So you should all please love us Republicans, because we're not, here we go, we're not going to allow the deficit to go up. We're not going to allow the government to borrow. We're not. Because that way they won't accumulate the debts with the interest costs that will end up you having to pay the taxes to cover. So vote for us. We will hold the government back from wasting by borrowing the way it always has. The government, remember this, should learn to live within its means, just like your family does. Wonderful. To an American population, 2% of the families do not spend more than they earn. So you're insulting the entire population, but they're so into the story, they don't register this. Now, keep that in your mind. Now fast forward to today. What is Trump and the GOP, what are they trying to do? They're trying to cut taxes on the people they love. Let me give you 3 examples. The corporate income tax, the proportion of profits a company earns that it must now, on the record, pay to the federal government as a share of its profits in tax is 35%. One of the highest in the world. That's correct. It's one of the highest in the world. But nobody except Gary Cohn's morons pays this. Why? Because there are 100 different ways to evade it. The biggest one right now, and keep this in mind because you're going to be hearing about this, the biggest one right now is the law in the United States, which says, if you can earn the money abroad, the profits for your company, and if you keep the money abroad in an account there, then you don't have to pay your taxes here. You don't have to pay it until you bring it home. You keep it out there for 10 years, you don't pay any tax. Not 35%, you pay nothing, zilch. Currently, estimate, $2.5 trillion of American corporate profits are outside the United States. But don't worry, and here comes one of the biggest lies that these folks are perpetrating, and they perpetrate whoppers. The lie goes like this. If we bring the money home, if we convince these companies to bring it home, well, then they'll have it here, and they'll spend it here, and create jobs with it here. This is wonderful. This is so stupid. It kind of, for folks like me, it takes your breath away. It's like the person who says, you see that used car I'm trying to sell you? Yes, it only has 2 wheels, but that makes it lighter. It'll go faster. And you know, and you feel for the person who goes, you're lighter, faster. You go, whoa, that's how I react. So let's go through it. If you have profits abroad and you leave them in an account, here's what you can tell the bank that you're leaving the account in. Use my money in my account here to buy shares of General Motors. No problem. They've already done all that. They've made the investments with that money, including in American companies, if they care about American companies. Bringing them here will do nothing. But it sounds good, and so the Trump administration is proposing to say to them, if you bring it back, here's the inducement. Instead of 35%, 5%. In other words, we will reward you. Not only did you avoid tax for 5 years, keeping that money out there, but now that you bring it back, you pay 5%, we'll look the other way. And that's because of the money coming back and then there's magic. It will make jobs. Folks, the corporate leaders who have that money, they're going to do with it what they want. They're not required to use that money to create jobs. They have no incentive to do that. They're not going to invest in this country because you can't sell anything here anymore anyway, etc., etc. If they make a job creation, it'll be a Chinese job creation that they make. Because that's what they've been doing. So that's the first step. He wants to lower the corporate tax rate in this country from 35%, Mr. Trump, to 15%. Who will that help? Small business. It will help them. Because those are the morons who actually have to pay, because they can't pay the fees to move their money to China or to India or to Brazil. They can't escape. They don't have the loopholes or the way to take advantage of the loopholes that big businesses do. So that's his way of it, getting support from little business, which he needs. He'll cut the corporate tax. Wow. He's going to eliminate the estate tax. We've already talked about that. I could go on, but he's cutting the taxes big time. Okay, now let's follow the logic, folks. If you cut the taxes that the federal government gets in all these ways, it means the government gets less money into its hands. That's what a tax cut is. You can call it a reform, you can call it an orange banana, whatever it is, it's less money coming into the government. What is the government going to do? It basically has two options. Option one, it can cut spending. If it doesn't have the money coming in from a tax cut, it'll cut spending. What the Republicans want is to cut the taxes and then say we can't afford giving loans to students. We can't afford the SNAP program. We can't afford to fix this or fix the other thing. That's one option. With less money coming in, you spend less. But of course, that makes all the people who get those spending howl. So here come the Democrats. They see an opportunity. We're going to represent the people who get screwed if the government stops spending. The Social Security people, the people on welfare, all those who get some help from the government. The Democrats are going to help them. So what is the Democratic proposal? Democratic proposal is you borrow the money. Because obviously if the government isn't getting money because it's not taxing corporations and the rich, and if you don't want to cut spending, the only remaining thing you can do is borrow the money. You borrow what you're no longer getting in taxes, right? You with me? It's got to do that. Either cuts the spending or it borrows. The Democrats, you all caught this, right? The other day, President Trump invited Nancy Pelosi and whatever that strange man is who's the senator from this state. Schumer, yes. Schumer and Pelosi, two people you would never in a right mind invite to dinner in your home. Right? He invited them to dinner in his home, or the home he's using, and they fought to defeat the Republicans. We're going to raise the debt ceiling. You know what that means? We're going to borrow the money in order to allow the government of Republicans to pander to the Republican rich people by cutting their taxes. The Democrats have found a solution. Borrow the money. Right? You with me? Forget this deficit crap. That's hard for the Republicans. They fight against deficit. They don't look so good. That's why they're angry. They look bad. But now follow the bouncing ball. If the government borrows the money to offset the lost tax revenue, who is it going to borrow the money from? Is it going to borrow it from you? Well, how many times have you and the government negotiated a loan in which you were the lender and they were the borrower? No, doesn't happen to you. Because you don't have money, or at least not enough. Don't take this personally. It's just, you don't have it. Who has it? Come on, you know. The people, the corporations. You know what they have? They have all the money. They don't have to pay in taxes anymore because the government reduced the taxes, right? That's where the story started. So now that they have money, they don't have to pay in taxes. They will lend it to the government. The only difference being when they paid taxes, they had to give it to the government. End of story. Now they get to take the same money, not to pay taxes. Taxes are cut. Lend it to the government, which will give it back to them after 5 or 10 years, during which they get nice interest payments. For rich people, It's a tax cut that converts what they used to pay in taxes into a loan. What rich person wouldn't go for this deal? This is so crooked, it smells from here to tomorrow. And if it sounds awful to you, then you've understood. From this charming game, you are excluded. You only have to have people like me who irritate you by telling you what's being done to you. Because meanwhile, the deficit's going up, which sooner or later the government will have to tax to pay the interest and to pay the money back. You escape nothing. Tax reform is a hustle. It is exactly here what it is with Mr. Macron in France or with the British. We don't have folks in the street because I can't reach enough people in a short enough time to make that happen, which I wish I could. But I also think if I explain it enough to you on the radio and television, maybe Americans will finally say, stop, this is lunacy. I just read you the taxes, the way the tax system already discriminates wildly against the rich. We have to do more of this? Yes, say the Republicans and the GOP. And they call it tax reform, and it will stimulate the economy and create jobs. And if you believe that, then I will sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, $18.42. And I'll sell it to you over and over again. Yes, sir.
Professor Wolff, there's a nuance about this that I hope at some point you are able to do some kind of analysis of. My union negotiated a huge loan with the government at one point. Victor got down, bailed out the city of New York. And so that's something I always think about, that this is also our money that's being used by these corporations to make these loans. So it's something that I at some point you have a chance to deal with.
Yes. More and more corporations, private corporations, local, state governments, when they need to borrow, discover that they can often get a better deal from the union using its pension monies and so forth to make that loan, and they make it a little bit nastier by threatening, if we don't get the loan from you, then we won't have enough money. We'll have to lay off some public employees. So you're in a way keeping your folks working by lending us, yes. The game never, ever stops. Let me move forward so we can get to some of the things we have to do. Labor Day. Since last we talked, it was August, so now we have had Labor Day. So I can't let Labor Day go by without a few words about Labor Day, if only to keep the mood light. Labor Day in the United States, as you all know, is first Monday in September, or first Monday after the first Tuesday, whatever it is. It's a holiday. Labor Day was actually begun in the United States. You all know that. I assume you all know that when there was a labor action in Chicago way back in the 19th century to fight for the 8-hour day, if I'm not mistaken. There was a demonstration. Some people got hurt. Some anarchists got accused. Then those anarchists were killed, and it became a big sort of workers' event. In most countries of the world, it is celebrated on May 1st, which is why it's called May Day. And in many countries, you see, unions and left-wing parties marching in the streets on Labor Day, on May 1st. It used to be in the United States at some point, but we changed that because we didn't want to be associated with anything pinkish or reddish. So we moved it to another part of the year. If that sounds childish to you, it is. That's childish and silly. It's right up there with French fries becoming freedom fries, and so forth. Or hamburgers becoming Salisbury steaks. I just found out that in World War I, we couldn't have hamburgers anymore because it reminded people of Hamburg, which is a city in Germany. Americans are sharp. And so we got rid of the hamburger and invented the Salisbury steak, which sounds British, What? Not Salzburg, though, that's German. It has to be Salisbury State. You know, like all those buildings in Manhattan that have, you know, Chambers Towers and all those British-sounding names here in a country where British people are, you know, once in a million. Anyway, other than tourists. Okay, Labor Day. The labor movement has been in a spiral of decline for half a century. It is a catastrophe for organized labor. I think the latest numbers I saw that the private sector in America, 6.3, I believe it is, 6.3% of private sector workers are either members of or represented by a labor union, which would mean that 90, whatever it is, 3% aren't. And that means something that I want to leave with you for sure. The next time you hear a political leader, an academic, a business leader talk about big corporations on the one hand and big labor on the other, throw something. There is no big labor, big corporation. There's big corporations and then there's silence. Labor is in an advanced state of decline. About 1950s, if my numbers are correct, something like a third of the labor movement, somewhere in the 30%, were organized. So we're now down to, I think if you put public and private together now, we're at 10% or something in that area. Unions have been declining. And I don't have much to add to all the many reasons that are given, but I do want to offer one you may not have thought about. The labor movement, organized workers, always were a minority. In other words, if you take the total population, what portion are working all day long in a job? It's a minority, it's less than 50%. And if you are a minority, even a big one like that, you need allies. You need people that will work with you, support you, vote for candidates that are friendly with you, help you. Let me drive the point home that labor needs allies by pointing out that the business community has the same problem, only worse. Because business employers are a much smaller minority than workers. They're tiny, the business, even if you put them all together, big ones, medium ones, and little ones, it's a tiny minority compared to employees. So employers have had to understand, if you want to survive as an employer, you've got to have allies. And they've done that. They reached, understandably, to the right side of the political spectrum. They make allies with social conservatives. They make allies with religious fundamentalists. They make allies with, fill in the blank, you know pretty well anyway. People on the right. They bring them into their political party, the Republican Party. Every now and then, it's a little embarrassing. Charlottesville was a little embarrassing who they're in bed with. But they understand allies. And even if they don't like them, and even if they disagree with them, they need them. And so there are a certain number of them in the cabinet. You all know who they are. And if they go, they're replaced by someone even worse in order to keep that. Mr. Pence has to be there with Mr. Trump because Mr. Trump is not believable as a sufficiently right-winger. He's believable as a friend of big business, but he's not believable as a friend of the local anti-abortion zealots. Mr. Pence is. And you see the alliance being produced and reproduced. Now let's turn to labor. Labor needs allies too, and it has, like business, kind of natural ones. They're the allies to the left. They're the leftist social movements. Anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-imperialism, whatever you want to call it, peace movement, whatever. All of that, they need them in order to have the muscle, the size, the financial support, the votes that they need, and they're going to have to give something to those folks, just like the business community. Mr. Trump gave American education to Mrs. DeVos, and she's going to do her Christian duty by that. And we're all going to watch as she does her thing. Ditto the others that he has put in there. That's all the alliance is. But we don't have that in America. That's my comment on the labor movement. The labor movement is deeply suspicious and skeptical, if not downright hostile, to large portions of its natural allies. It doesn't trust them. And I'm not saying there aren't events in history that justify worrying, but that's always true in an alliance of different people. It's always possible it'll go bad, the alliance will break up, but it's not an argument not to make one. The labor movement has very few allies. Some, but very few, many fewer than it could have if it just halfway met them 50-50. And then it would have the strength to confront the business. But what we have is a business community that understands it has to pay financially, it has to cultivate, it has to build, maintain, and strengthen an alliance. The labor movement doesn't understand it, is not willing to do it anywhere near what it could in terms of who's out there and what that might mean to change the balance. But for 50 years, one of the most profound results of the Cold War was the splitting of the labor movement from, let's be honest, the socialists and the communists who helped build the modern labor movement in the 1930s and 40s out of the Great Depression, when the socialists and the communists and the unions all worked together, even though they had their differences then and they had their disagreements then, and they will still have them, but they understood what could be gained if they worked together. And boy, did they gain in the 1930s. I won't bore you with it again. That's when Social Security was created in America, because socialists, communists, and unions went to the government and said, you got to do that. That's when unemployment compensation happened, when they went and they said, you got to do it. That's the first time we had a minimum wage in this country, because they said you have to do that. And that was the only time we had a massive government employment program to solve unemployment, when 15 million American unemployed people got jobs because the socialists, communists, and unions got together enough to make that happen. You don't build alliances, you have a history like the American labor movement has for the last 50 years. The animosity of the business community, labor unions can't do much about. The animosity of the government, they can't. But building an alliance with the people to their left, they could actually do that, which makes it even more upsetting that they haven't. So that's something to think about for Labor Day. All right. Let me close with nature and capitalism in the time that I have. So we've had these terrible storms. You probably noticed. You would have to be dead not to have been aware of Harvey and Irma. There was a Jose, but he disappears. Was there a Jose coming after Irma? But Jose took a vacation. He's gone. Or maybe he's still out. Does anyone know what happened to?
Over the front that's coming over the country.
Pushed him.
The flow was going back out into the Atlantic.
Into the ocean. Okay. All right. So apparently we won't then have a catastrophe called Jose. But we have had two catastrophes, Harvey and Irma. And again, I don't want to go over what you already know, the horrible suffering, the heroic rescues, all of which you saw and you've thought about. So I wondered to myself, what can I offer you? And I think the answer is to try to explain what ought to be on your mind, even if it isn't, which is, how is it possible in areas of the country, Texas, Louisiana, Florida, that have had these kinds of storms repeatedly, some of whom very bad, such storms, why was the preparation minimal? And let me just give you two or three examples. In the midst of the Harvey disaster in Texas, reporters asked the governor of Texas, why did you not order the people to evacuate from all of the low-lying, near-the-water parts of that corner of Texas? Get them on the road to get out of there. He laughed. He said, if everybody got on the road, there would be no way to move, and we would have the 50 miles of traffic jam on the road. For him, this was a perfectly reasonable answer. And to be fair, if you're the governor of Texas, you wouldn't want to expect too much more than that anyway. But you might want to ask the question, if the road isn't a means of evacuation, jackass, what is? How are people going to get out? And the answer, of course, was he had no idea. Fortunately, no one asked him. The reporters are very dutiful. Politician doesn't answer, you go on to another question. What's going on here? There's no protection. There's not. The soil, another scientist I'm watching the TV explains, the soil around that part of Texas is spongy, whatever exactly that means. But he explains, this scientist does, it soaks up like a sponge water, up to a point, like a sponge. After that, water goes on the sponge says, no, we're done, I'm not taking any more. At which point the water just runs off because the sponge isn't going to take any more. Turns out the soil all around there, so if you have, ready, heavy rain, for a while the ground will soak it up and then the ground will say, that's it, we're done. Here, it's going into town, fast. They know that. So what possesses people to build homes, businesses, roads, schools, churches, everything, where they know it's vulnerable to what we just saw, which isn't the first time, and everybody tells us it won't be the last. This is crazy. So what's the explanation? Here's the best I can do. In America, it's well known, if you haven't studied it, do so, you'll see this. It's well known that local politics is overwhelmingly dominated in most parts of the United States by what are called developers. Developers are groups of people who include banks, construction companies, everybody who's got money to be made by building things, clearing the land, building subdivisions with houses, and all of that, industrial parks and consumer malls and all of that. These people dominate local politics for a very simple reason. They need the zoning arrangements, they need the tax cuts, they need the subsidies in order to make these projects profitable. So you control the mayor and the governor. Look here, even Mr. de Blasio, who's a left of center, is in trouble with developers. Yeah, because that's the name of this game. Those people are there all day, every day, with high-paid lobbyists who can hurt you if you don't do what they want and reward you if you do, etc., etc., etc. The developers want what? They want to build houses. They want to build malls. They want to build roads. They want to build office towers, because that's the money. That's where they build. That's what they do. They borrow the money from the banks, and then they hire the construction companies, and they give the jobs, by the way, large numbers of jobs to undocumented immigrants from Central America, etc., etc., etc. They don't want the project slowed down so we can do a study of the spongy earth. There's no money in studies of spongy earth. It just, at best, slows them down. And they don't want to have big taxes to pay for immense walls that make the project cost too much. They want to build what they can sell. They'll build a house, sell it to you. They build a mall, sell it to, Target or somebody else who will anchor the mall. I say Target, I get letters. So I now say Target, Bus driver, transportation engineer. It's the same thing. So what we had here is it's a spectacular comment on capitalism and how it works. Profit drives the system. Concerns about long-term risks, concerns about helping the community, protecting it, finding a way to get people out of a dangerous area can be hit by such storms. That takes time and energy and money, and there's no profit in that. And so it doesn't happen. And not only that, you can begin to see now, as someone pointed out to me on my way here today, you can already see the drooling happiness of developers as they begin to imagine the contracts now to rebuild the houses, rebuild the roads, in the same way that they did last time. And you know how we know it's going to be like that? Because that's what they've done each other time. We're going to have a boom redoing the same thing. And here's the worst of it. How much wealth will be lost here? The estimates are all over the place, but $100 to $200 billion, if you put the two states together, is the ballpark we're talking about. For a fraction of that, you could have developed all kinds of evacuation systems, protection systems, walls, all kinds of things. For a small fraction of that. You didn't do it. It's a system that is so set up that it is hostile to the very idea of a collective action. Hostile to a government, which is the logical agency to do all of this, to monitor the soil, to make sure the evacuation routes are there, precisely because private enterprise has no motive to do it. Capitalism is a system that prides itself on providing incentives. That was always crazy. But even if you accept it, it's incentives to make profits. But there's no incentive to do the rational thing here, which is to react to these storms in a way that they didn't. And I'm angry about it because I can see the media focusing us on the lovely story of the firefighter who rescues the pussycat from the top of the truck that's submerged in water. It's a marvelous moment, but it's saving us from asking the hard question, why the hell is this car submerged? Why does the middle of the street have 8 feet of water in it? What in the world? And this is the 10th time in 100 years that they've had 8 feet of water in it. This is lunacy, a society that lives like this. And you can be sure that when the time comes to pay for the reconstruction, it's going to come out of all of us. Because it'll be the government. When the private profit doesn't work, it's turning to the government, the very agency they denounce for incompetence, to bail them out of the mess they've made. That's what we did with the banks in 2008 when they blew the financial world apart. We bailed them out with your money and my money. That's what's going to happen here. Last little point. When the big insurance companies suffered some losses a few years ago, they left Florida. It was too expensive, too dangerous to provide flood insurance or any kind of insurance. They left. That meant the people of Florida, in a crazy capitalist system, if the private insurance company leaves, you can't get any insurance. So this was deemed to be a problem, so the local politicians helped get little Florida companies to step in, where Allstate and the big State Farm and those other monster ones left. So most of the people in Florida right now are insured by little companies. Now here's the problem. The little companies don't have enough reserves. So you've bought a policy, you've paid every month or whatever it is you're supposed to, and you're insured if your roof blows off, you're going to... But of course you're only insured if when you go to the insurance company, you've got the money, but they don't. It's already known. They don't have anything like the money that they're going to need. So either one of two things happens. Either the people with no roof learn to enjoy the great outdoors, or we will all pay more taxes from the federal government, which will help the people of Florida to compensate them for the failure of the private profit-driven insurance companies to do what they're supposed to do. You are living in an economic system that's broken. It's not coming back. It cannot solve your problems. And as it faces bigger and bigger problems like these storms, it's going to display for all who are willing to see its dysfunction, its inability to work. That's the biggest problem we all face. And we live in a society that is going through this experience and is in the deepest imaginable denial of what is happening to itself. And you know, if I understand psychology at all, it's bad if you have a problem, but that's much worse if you have to deny that you had that problem. Then the consequences to you are doubled and tripled in their horror. You have at least, like in those AA programs, you have to begin by saying, hello, I'm here, I'm an alcoholic. You have to put your problem on the table, because otherwise you are running away from it and you're not going to be much good to yourself or to the others in the room. I know we've run out of time. I wanted to stop early. I didn't stop as early as I would like to. So let me ask, Alan, you have a very quick, can you be really quick? Because I've overrun my time. We'll do it next month. Okay, folks, thank you very much.